Good morning, everybody from a distance. Before I begin, I would like to thank the organizers of this year's SLTC conference for giving us the chance, the opportunity to speak to you about zeology, the novel tanning method that you probably heard about already or read about, while some of you may even have tried it yourself. And while you tried it or while you read it, you gave it some thought. And perhaps you thought, what's really behind it? How is it working in the drum? Because it's all very nice and well on paper. But what are the critical parts of this process, if there are any? And today I would like to discuss them with you. I would like to show you some points where we need to pay a bit more attention when we want to apply zeology tanning. While we've been introducing zeology tanning, of course, we came across surprises. We came across things we didn't know, or we came across things that we knew, but that were different on a large scale than they were on a small scale. Now, everything that we found and observed and what our customers told us fitted quite neatly together in a small set of statements that you can make. Some general statements that we call the golden rules for zeology tanning. These rules are, as you can see on the image on the right, mainly for the drums. But before we go to the drum, we go into our own minds. Because the first and perhaps most important rule is that we realize that also zeology tanning is a tanning system in its own right that can stand on its own 2 feet. But it means we have to have an open mind, and sometimes an open mind to the extent that we forget or try to forget what we already know. Because not everything that we are used to, not everything that works for other tanning agents works equally well for zeology. These are the guidelines that we developed and that I would like to discuss with you after the next slide. In the next slide, there will be a very brief explanation on how zeology tanning actually works. I will not compare it to other tanning agents. That would go too far, and I think you, as the audience, can see the difference right away. Zeology, well, that's clear, is based on zeolites. Now, zeolites are microporous aluminosilicates, and these still form the basis of zeolite tanning. A zeolite in itself, when it's added to water, will do not much more than increasing the pH. It will neither dissolve nor will it disperse. But since we are working in an aqueous medium, since the tanning agent has to be applied into a float, there's a critical point. And that's where zeology tanning is unique. Because zeology tanning works with a zeolite-based tanning agent, where the zeolite has been modified in order that we can apply it without problems. It's the first critical phase of the tanning. The drum door is opened and the zeolite is added into the pickle float. And where before the zeolite has a crystalline structure, it needs to go into a more workable structure. A crystalline structure for tanning, that will not work. So in the pickle float, it immediately falls apart into smaller structures. Very well controlled smaller structures. And what we are getting is a dispersion and not a solution. A dispersion of highly uniform particle size that enables the tanning agent to penetrate into the fibers. So from that moment on, the zeolite begins to penetrate the pelt inside. And while it penetrates, it already slowly, gently reacts. And you can see this from an increase in hydrothermal stability. At the end of the penetration phase, yes, we have some better shrinkage temperatures, some quite decent shrinkage temperature, but it's not enough. Speak of leather, the tanning agent needs to be activated. During this activation, the dispersed zeolite tanning agent begins to regroup, begins to reform into a mesh-like structure that covers the fibers, a continuous sheath. This is a tanning where the tanning agent covers a much wider area than you have with chrome or GDA, where chrome and GDA are local bindings of high strength. Zeology is tanning that takes place everywhere on the collagen. And the tanning is in the sum of all these small bonds that are created. But let's go to the drum, and let's go way back to where it all starts, soaking and liming. Yes, you can take your standard pelt that has been soaked and limed as you always do it. If you do it in the right manner, if you take care of everything, it should be quite okay. It should be good. But many times we see that the pelts are not so properly prepared as we once learned in school. And zeology tanning is maybe a little bit less forgiving than other tannages. It forces us to go back to school, to go back to basics. That's all. So the advices that will come are not fancy advices, not strange advices. They're all well known to all of you. Zeology forms a dispersion, and this dispersion needs to penetrate before it can be activated. And for penetration, the dispersion needs room. So we advise to take very high care, good care of opening up of your hide, opening up with your pelt. And the opening up already starts in the soaking, not only in the liming. And in the liming, you can go one step further than you are perhaps used to with chrome tannage. Don't be too afraid. Don't overdo it, but don't be afraid to go one small step further. The tanning will hugely benefit from this. Now, most of you will already work like this, but sometimes it happens that shortcuts are taken and that we end up with pelts where we know that the fibers are not so well separated, the processes were too short, or not in the right order of things. And this can lead to a different zeology concentration in different parts of the hide. And if we overdo it, we could even end up with some raw patches. And this is what we try to avoid, what we have to avoid at all costs. Yeah, let's face it. Soaking and liming should ultimately be adjusted to fit zeology tanning. Natural grease is critical. As you could see on the 2 slides before this one, this coating that makes zeology tanning unique is quite similar to the coating an oil or even a normal fat liquor does. And natural grease that remains tends to coat the fibers in a way that is similar to the tanning action of zeology. In a way, they are competing for the same surface. If natural grease is not properly removed, or even worse, if it has been emulsified, partly dissolved, but not really removed, washed out, and gets trapped in the outer layers, in the grain and in the flesh, then we sometimes see that it retards zeology's ability to fully react with collagen. This golden rule is a bit strong. We will never get all the grease out, but still, let's try to go as far as we can and say the grease needs to be gone. Part 1, opening. And when you opened the pelt, you must also make it clean again. You added all the chemicals before, now get them out again so that you can start your tanning. And deliming is the gateway to this. We always believe that deliming is quite simple. It's good, yeah, and we check it with phenolphthalein, as on the image on the right. Is it pink? It's not good. If it's not pink, then clear, it's good. But this does not tell us what is really going on in the leather. It does not tell us whether everything has been removed or not. Deliming is critical for zeology tanning. And I would like to give you 3 examples where it can interact. Firstly, it can be a matter of blocking. If products from previous processes, mainly lime, are not fully solubilized, not fully removed, they can simply sit there and block the entrance for the tanning agent. It is a dispersion, even though it's a very, very fine dispersion, it may have difficulties to find its way around. The second issue that we can have is that traces of calcium or other alkali that are still left in the pelt can be absorbed into the matrix form of the zeolite. Because it's not a single small round ball. Now, zeolite is a cage structure with many voids. And in these voids, all sorts of things can hide if you're perhaps comfortable. And this would change the charge, this would change many characteristics of the tanning agent. So better have them out. And the third part is that everything that we don't wash out during deliming and baiting will have an influence on the pickle. And as you will see after this, a bit later, the pickle is the most crucial process, as far as I'm concerned, of the tannage. And that's why I say, solubilize and remove all traces of lime, not only for cleanliness' sake, but also in order to gain full control of your pickle. Deliming agents that we use must not only neutralize, but they must also dissolve and support the washing out of residual lime. Ammonium salts are not so ideal here. They neutralize, it's a pH matter, but they are not the best to really remove all the liming residues. Much better are organic and inorganic acids and their salts. And if you work with thick pelts, full substance, unsplit, also includes some carboxylic esters or aliphatic dicarboxylic acids to minimize the mechanical stress in the process of deswelling these thick hides. But that's actually common knowledge. That's not only true for zeology. Speaking about ammonium salts, these are to be used in minimal quantities only, and they better be replaced by some alternatives of the type I explained before. Yeah, and here I put the rule up front. Zeology is made in the pickle, and it depends on the right choice of acids. And I put it up front for a reason, because as I said before, the pickle is the make or break part of the tanning. For pickling, we use relatively more formic acid than with other tannages. It is it's the most important pickle acid. But we start our tannage at a relatively low pH, 2.4, 2.7, which we will never get, which we will never achieve with formic acid only. And for that reason, we use sulfuric acid to adjust it to the right level. Don't overdo it with sulfuric acid. Here there's some big don'ts. Don't do these. Don't just play around with single acids, even if they're labeled organic. And even less with blended acids. Because not everything that's labeled organic is suitable. It only tells you that it's not a mineral acid. And the tricky thing with these blended acids that are on the market is they make us believe that there's a very special reason for blending this acid to that acid in this and that ratio. And that may be true, but since we don't know what acids are inside, it's most probably very counterproductive for zeology tanning. Please stick to formic acid and sulfuric acid only. And going back to the liming and the deliming, don't use the pickle as a repair job to fix what you didn't do before. I stressed this a few times, a stable dispersion is critical. And to get this stable dispersion, you need to play around with the acids. And this is again where the formic acid comes in. Formic acid enables us to create the stablest dispersion possible with zeology tanning agents. And you can even improve this stability by adding the acid in multiple additions. Zeology tanning agent is used in 2 steps. One portion for maybe 30 minutes, then the second portion. And the ideal way to use it is to keep some of the pickle acid, the formic acid, for the second portion. We call this a chaser pickle. Do your normal pickle, add the first portion of zeology, then use some acid that you kept, add this, and you add the second portion of zeology. This ensures that the tanning bath remains very stable and you can achieve uniformist penetration. To sum it up, zeology is added in 2 equal portions. Ideally with a small amount of formic acid in between. And this helps to maintain a uniform float pH, and I have to add a very uniform dispersion during the critical phase. And the critical phase is the phase of penetration. Now we've come a long way, and only the activation is needed to finish the job. Other than with mineral tanning agents, zeology has no basicity because it is not a mineral tanning agent. So we cannot speak about increasing its basicity. It's not there. But still, the tanning action is highly pH dependent. In the early stage, it needs to be retarded and be kept as a fine and stable dispersion for it to penetrate. But later on, once this has been achieved, the tanning power has to be released by increasing the pH to get the fiber coatings and this high tanning power. Sodium bicarbonate, soda ash, magnesium oxide, all three promote fiber coating and a good deacidification of zeology. Because don't forget, we are using relatively large amounts of formic acid, and we should neutralize as much as possible of this. The basic process looks activation for 6 hours minimum with a final pH of 4.8 to 5. And this final pH must not be achieved 1 minute before you drain the drum, but it should be achieved at least 2 hours before finishing the process. Only in this way, a complete even activation is ensured. These are the golden rules. And if you apply them, beautiful letters come from it. Now, I don't want to linger too long here, but you see some famous names. These are articles that are for sales, that are on the market. As you can see on the top, second from the left, the lady with the hat, that's our Dutch queen. And from her looks, she also approved of zeology tanning. And with this small remark, I would like to end my presentation. I thank you for your attention, and any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.